been very fortunate to have, a wide range of topics and great presenters, certainly.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, very cool.
And the nice thing is that, we archive all of the presentations to the website so that, these presentations kind of live on. Not everybody can join live, but, it's a good opportunity for people to be able to continue to learn, even if it's a, rainy day or something. They can take advantage of the educational opportunity.
Yeah.
And we are getting some rain.
Yeah.
Nice.
Finally.
Yeah. Once it decided to start raining, it really decided to start.
All right, everyone, welcome. Good morning, and welcome to the Florida Friendly Landscaping Professional Webinar Series. Today's webinar is Are You Missing Out on Some Trees? Find out about some underutilized trees with Dr. Jason Smith. You'll notice your microphones have been muted, so please put your questions into the chat box or the Q&A box, and we'll take those questions at the end of the webinar here today. The webinar has been approved for one CEU from FFL CP, FNGLA, LAIF, FTEX, and it is approved for a landscape architecture CEU. I saw you, Jeff. Although we are reapplying for a provider license, so there will be a delay if that's what you want. It is still approved, but I can't submit it until we get our license renewed. And with those CEUs, there's a $10 administration fee to receive that certificate of continuing education. And I'll put a link in the box a little later in the webinar if you would like those CEUs. And this is part of a monthly webinar series held on the second Tuesday of the month at 10 a.m. The next webinar we have coming up is Get Your Grasses Growing with the one and only Erin Alvarez, who's we're very happy she'll be with us next month. Later this month, we are also offering a Green Stormwater Infrastructure webinar series. And this is in partnership with DEP and Ferguson Waterworks. And that will be on July 27th, and it will be on swales and bioswales. So if you can, tune in for that one as well. And one last thing is you'll see a survey invitation pop up. Please take a moment to fill that out when you have a moment. It really helps us determine what type of educational programming we're going to offer in the future. And believe it or not, we will start preparing for next year, 2024, pretty soon. So now is a great time to put in your requests for future training. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom Wickman to introduce today's speaker.
Claire, thank you so much. Again, my name is Tom Wickman. I'm the Assistant Director of the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, and so glad you can join us for today's webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, and today's speaker is Dr. Jason Smith. He serves as a professor of forest pathology in the School of Forest Fisheries and Geomatic Sciences at the University of Florida. He's the State Forest Health Extension Specialist and serves on the graduate faculty of the Department of Plant Pathology and is a member of the Emerging Pathogens Institute. His research focuses on emerging fungal disease identification and etiology, and his lab examines the identities and relationships of emerging, re-emerging, or new fungal pathogens and develops technology aimed at their subsequent detection and surveillance. His lab also has been studying fungal pathogen dispersal and environmental health. His lab has produced over 85 peer-reviewed journal publications, 3 book chapters, and a book. Jason serves on several editorial boards, including Forest Pathology and Plant Pathology. He has also won numerous awards for his efforts. As you can tell, Dr. Smith is a rock star, and he's an amazing talent and has incredible horticultural knowledge. I feel really excited that he's here speaking to us today. Jason has recently accepted a new position and will be leaving the University of Florida for a position closer to home and family up in Ohio. We will certainly miss his participation here at University of Florida, but we'll consider him, a friend and a partner, and we'll keep in contact with him as he moves up north and discovers some new research areas, certainly up north. Today, Dr. Smith is going to help you possibly expand your plant palette by talking about underutilized trees. It's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Dr. Jason Smith.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. It was very kind of you, and some really undeserved praise, I think, but I appreciate that. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thank you very much for joining us. And this is a topic that's always a pleasure to discuss and easy to discuss, because it's something that's close to my heart, and something that's really just a passion of mine, something that's really and something that has been something I should say that's just I guess more of a hobby, or more of a just a sorry about that, something that's just more of a I guess you could say just a passion, because I've just loved working with tree species and working with trying to diversify the landscape ever since I've lived here in Florida. And so I teach dendrology here with Michael Andrew and in the school, and I've had the pleasure of developing my own private arboretum on my landscape, and have over time we've been growing and evaluating different plant species here in around Gainesville, both at Citra, where we've got several acres of landscape where we've been growing a bunch of different species, and then also through collaborations with a number of different botanical institutions. I've been involved in growing a lot of rare and unusual woody plants, in particular trees, through some different collaborations. And so for that reason, the title that I've used is focused on North Florida landscapes. That said, we will definitely talk about the broader adaptations and species that are adaptable beyond this region. But because the experiences that I've had personally, and the specific experiences that I've had have been focused on this particular region, the bulk of the talk will focus on the experience that I have in North Florida, but we will talk about species that are adaptable beyond. But Florida is a highly variable state, and what is hardy in Orlando or even Ocala may not necessarily be hardy in Gainesville, and even in Alachua County, there are species that will grow right here on campus that I can, no matter how hard I try, will not survive at my house. Literally, 10 miles, 11 miles from here. And I'm sure Tom can attest to this as well, because we live very close to each other. Because on cold winter nights, just one night or 2 nights a year, because of radiational freezes that we get, on those nights, it's so much colder outside of town, away from the influence of the urban heat island effect and things that we have here on campus. There will be species that you can get away with here in town, that will not survive, out in the more rural areas. And that's true in many parts of the state, right? And I'm sure we could discuss those types of microclimates and variability. And there's lots of different types of variability that we'll discuss that influences what can grow where, and that's part of the discussion we need to have. So at the very beginning, instead of just jumping right into the species, I want to talk about why it's important to diversify, and a little bit about some of the issues that we're dealing with. So to begin with, I mean, in urban areas, it's very difficult, right? So urban trees, if we're talking about trees that are going to be planted in urban areas, they're very often improperly selected. We have a lot of species that are being planted in urban areas that really aren't the correct species for the locations. And I mean, we see this all the time. Trees that are going to get too large for the site, trees that require different types of soils that are planted in urban areas that don't have the right soils for those locations or for those species. They obviously have to put up with utilities, the artificial environment of urban areas, right, that are completely manufactured, they could be manufactured soils, concrete all around them, just completely not what those species are adapted to. And as a result, sometimes they don't perform very well. And so we might be trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and we end up with poor results. And they're often also exposed to pollutants, whether it be intentional or not. Sometimes it's intentional, obviously, repeated applications of herbicides, lots and lots of fertilizers and things like that. But it may also be unintentional. It might be things like sulfur dioxide, ozone, and those other types of pollutants that are common in urban areas that some species, might be very adaptable to and very resistant to, but some may not be. And then, of course, there's a lot of extra heat, and that leads to additional stress. They are often frequently vandalized, as you can see in the pictures to the right. And they're often disfigured by amateur arborists who think they know best, or by homeowners who do. And, some species can put up with this better than others. And all of this leads to a shortened lifespan of a city tree. And there are, some good statistics out there for sort of the average lifespan of a city tree, but in some cities it's remarkably short. And I think it's probably wise to plan for this, quite frankly, that we should be planning for the idea that that if you're going to plant trees in highly urbanized areas, that perhaps these trees are going to be only going to be there for a short period of time, and maybe it's we're going to be putting new trees in more frequently than we think, and therefore maybe if that's the case, then perhaps it might be okay to put species in there that are some of the more short-lived species in some cases. If we're not going to be putting trees that are going to be living there for 50 or 100 years, then maybe those are the locations where it might be okay to put trees that are known to have shorter lifespans in some cases. There's especially if they have the capability to deal with some of these other stresses, some of these other issues that I just mentioned. And obviously, trees that are capable of putting up with a lot, and in some cases they may end up taking over our cities again if time passes long enough, and that's my hope, but we'll have to wait and see. Does anybody know where this is? I'm sure some of you have maybe visited this site. It's one of the most iconic sites where trees have reconquered the urban landscape, given enough time. Anyway, keep going here. But so back to the first statement I made about the variation in the state of Florida. If we just simply look at climate, and we don't even take into account microclimate, but just simply macroclimate, just the basics of macroclimate on the effect on what species can be chosen. People were, when they saw my title, I saw people immediately asking, okay, what about South Florida? What about South Florida? Well, again, it'd be impossible really to give this talk and really do a good job of saying, well, here's a bunch of species that we can just plant everywhere. If I did that, we really wouldn't be talking about a lot of underutilized species for the most part, because the really common things, the ones that can be planted everywhere already are, right? I mean, things like live oak, sable palm, slash pine, the ones that have the wide distributions, those are the things that you do see everywhere that are common, the ones that are planted across, the entire breadth of the state of Florida for the most part. You do see those everywhere. And if we look at the hardiness zones, I mean, even within, like I said, even within these hardiness zones, there's a lot of variation. Within, like I said, even within these counties, there's a lot of variation and things that don't, because you have to take into account, this is, these hardiness zones are over, large periods of time, 30-year annual extreme minimums, but then, there can be extreme events that might happen, and these might happen more frequently too, by the way, of course, with climate change, but you might have these 1 year, extremes, but then there's sort of like these little topographical features that have to be accounted for, frost pockets and things like that. And then there's little warm pockets, of course, with urban areas, which are becoming larger. And so you have these heat island effects. And so there's lots of different factors to take into account. And then on top of that, you have soils, which of course have a big influence. And soils influence, of course, tree species selection should influence tree species selection in a major way. There's a lot of different types of soils in Florida. Of course, everyone thinks Florida is just one big sand pile, and it's not. And if you pay close attention to this, you notice this, of course, where you have deeper sands. Of course, you have certain species that are going to be more frequent and in natural settings and are going to be more likely to grow. There's certain nutrient effects, nutrient deficiencies become more frequent where you have certain types of soils, or more available. Nutrients become more available. For example, where there's clay, deposits, or where clay becomes available, you will have potentially better, nutrient availability, and they may be less prone to certain nutrient deficiencies. But on the other hand, you may have issues with things like, drainage, issues. You may have root rot concerns when you have inundated conditions. So there's lots to consider with the soil types in Florida. And then if we look at the actual species, it's something that it needs to be considered, and I think isn't considered enough, is provenance. Provenance it has to do with the genetics of the species, that is the seed source. Just because you have a given species that's native to an area does not necessarily mean that it's adapted. And a good example is red maple, Acer rubrum. So Acer rubrum is native all the way from South Florida, all the way to Nova Scotia, and all the way to northern Minnesota and southern Manitoba. And so, and in East Texas. So you look at that massive range, distributional range, and you have to recognize that, the populations of the species from all those different areas are not adapted to all the areas within that range, right? So if you take a red maple from, say, upstate New York, and you plant it in Florida, it's not going to grow well. It's not going to be adapted. It's genetically adapted to the latitude, the soils, the climate of New York. And so even if you just consider the photo period that it's adapted to in New York, you plant it in Florida, one of the big issues is that it won't leaf out properly in the spring because it's not adapted to the photo period conditions that we have. And so this is why sometimes you'll see things like cypress and taxodium, or you'll see red maples, or some of the other, there's several species that have these large distributions like this. You'll see them planted in Central and South Florida, and they don't look well. They're not growing well. And even though they're growing in the right conditions, they might be planted where there's good moisture and things like that, but they're not actually, they're not growing good. The growth rhythm looks off. I've seen sweet gums like this. I've seen literally all of these species doing this, and it's a clear case usually of nurseries sourcing them from the wrong provenance. They've acquired them from some nursery that grew seed from some northern source. So this is a very, very critical point, and it's something that needs to be considered. And this is true of, like I said, not just these common species, but things that are less common as well that we'll talk about in a minute. And urban landscapes can be very tough for native trees in particular. And so when you want to cite species that are some of these, underutilized species that we'll talk about, you have to really think about the fact that these urban situations are particularly difficult because in many cases we're utilizing irrigation water that has high pH that will strip the nutrients out of the water. You'll have low, you may end up with reduced iron, for example, like we're seeing here in this photo. So these yellow pines that we see in this photograph, they're exhibiting chlorosis as a result of high pH. That's a very frequent issue, and particularly in South Florida, where you end up with these higher pH soils, and the pines are suffering as a result. Whereas if you were to look at the same species in a nearby area where they're not getting affected by irrigation water, they wouldn't be dealing with that issue. And so that's another situation that we have to accommodate for. And another reason why we have to think about some of the needs of some of these species and how they may be adapted or not adapted. Something else that's happened frequently is sorry about that, is that there's been a frequent sort of tendency in horticulture to move from propagating plants from cuttings, or move from instead of growing trees from seed, to propagate them from cuttings or vegetatively propagate them. In the past, people just transplanted saplings from the forest. I mean, historically that was how people propagated plants, which meant that they were getting genetically different individuals. Landscapers have, over time favored uniformity. They've wanted individuals that looked the same, had the same characteristics, wanted trees that had the same uniformity in branch structure, crown structure, same features overall, same flowers, whatever. And so that has led to the development of cultivars, right? And so we have cultivars, and those cultivars are genetically the same, they're vegetatively propagated. And this has happened, over the centuries, and we've ended up with more and more and more cultivars. And basically nurseries favor this as well, because it makes it more easier to grow a crop, and so we end up with less and less genetic diversity. And this has a lot of consequences, and it's certainly something that we have to keep I guess addressing. But there's a greater potential as a pathologist. This is something that concerns me, because it leads to more epidemics of diseases. If you have a disease, of course, less genetic diversity in the host means that the impact is bigger. And we've seen this happen over and over with plant species. And monocultures, meaning a single strain or single genetic individual of a host, has been a big problem for pests and diseases. So we've seen a lot of this, and there's a lot of examples. Sorry about that. And there's, like I said, this leads to, less resistance or more susceptibility over time, and they tend to be impacted more greatly. Sorry about that. Geez, I'm having trouble with my presentation. And you end up with higher inoculum over time because it builds up on the host. And so, and this has happened with both native and introduced pests and diseases. And it's thought that over time, also there'll be just less ability of these, these low genetic, these hosts that have lower genetic variability to tolerate stress, or to be able to adapt to stress, things like climate change as well. And so we tend to, think about disease and pest outbreaks as being the interaction of the host, the pathogen, and the environment. This is conceptualized in the disease triangle. I don't want to get into this, and spend a lot of time on this, but it's just the interaction of all three coming together, and really that environment component is really important. And there's been a lot of examples of this. This goes back, these, propagating trees individually as clones goes way back. I mean, we've been doing this for a long time, and we can look at examples of this in landscape architecture for going back all the way back to the late 1700s even. There's a lot of horticultural varieties. The Lombardy poplar was one of the earliest introduced clones. It was introduced from Italy and propagated, by cuttings, sent all the way around the world. And even in Philadelphia, here's an example of what the streets of Philadelphia looked like. It looked like in 1800. And they were, propagated and grown in, all the cities, around that time period. Here they were planted in Washington, D.C. in 1820. And they were planted, all over the world in the early, 1800s. And then very soon, a fungal pathogen started affecting these trees in many places, and to the point where they were dying off, in most places around, especially the eastern United States and many other places due to this fungal pathogen. And this pathogen was very virulent. It's called cryptodiaporthy, and it causes cankers, and this was a good example. And so they started dying off. And so anyway, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but the same thing happened with elms, with American elms. We planted our streets with American elms. The American elm made a perfect, street tree. So after the Lombardy poplars died off, in the 1800s, streets were planted with American elm, and the American elm made this majestic, vase-shaped canopy. And so streets were planted with American elms in places like Detroit, Chicago, New York. A lot of our northern cities were planted with American elms. Like I said, they made these big, cathedral-like ceilings almost, right, of canopies. And so they were tough as nails. They grew fast, and they can tolerate urban conditions. A lot of those things that I said earlier about urban conditions, American elms can tolerate. So people planted them, and they planted monocultures of them, literally monocultures, just street after street after street of American elm. And I think a lot of you know what happened, right? Dutch elm disease came along, and it's caused by this fungus, Ophiostoma novaulmi, and most American elm species, or most elm species, including American and European elms, are very susceptible. And I'm not going to spend time on all the details of the pathogen here, but the fungus rapidly kills the trees. They die, within a few weeks, and within a summer, entire city blocks can be killed, in terms of all the trees dying from this. And so the fungus is spread by beetles, but it's also spread by root grafts between the trees, and management of this is very difficult. It's very expensive. You have to treat them with a systemic fungicide, or you have to remove the affected trees, and it became a big problem, and cities had to deal with it. They had whole streets just dead, dead trees, huge investment of money to try to deal with this. The impact was just massive, and entire cities, the character of the cities changed as a result. Losing all these American elms was a massive issue, and so you can imagine, losing all these, these trees, the impact on cities, and I mean, property values, everything changed. And so when a lot of these American elms died, you'd think that cities would sort of maybe learn their lesson and diversify the landscape, maybe plant different species, not plant a monoculture. But unfortunately, a lot of lessons are hard to learn. And this lesson hadn't been learned yet. And a lot of cities actually, instead of planting a diverse palette of species, what they did is they came in and said, well, okay, let's find some other species that grows fast, is tough, will tolerate urban conditions, but let's just plant a lot of them. So they did. And what they did is they planted green ash. So many of these same locations were then replanted with green ash. And so here's the same street, by the way, in Detroit, that on the top that was American elms was replanted. That was in 1971 on the top, and then you can see what it looked like below. And a lot of these streets were planted with green ash. Sorry, little joke. Yeah, I can hear everyone laughing now. So they were planted with green ash. And then you fast forward about 20 or so years, and in the 1990s, guess what came along? Something else that liked ash trees, the emerald ash borer. So in Detroit, around late 90s or so, the emerald ash borer, this little green insect, comes along that loves ash trees and feeds on the inner bark, the phloem of ash trees, and rapidly kills the ash trees. And it was extremely successful at killing millions and millions of ash trees. So it's native to China, and native trees there are resistant, but our ash trees here in North America, native Fraxinus, are not. And it's killed hundreds of millions of trees. Native US species, like I said, are not resistant to it, and it's extremely difficult to manage. There's a lot of things being tested, a lot of people working on this, but it's killing massive numbers of ash. Look, does this look familiar? I mean, you could just take, you could just literally just replace these with elms, and it would be the same situation. But it's, in this case, it's green ash, right? I mean, it's just like every generation has their story now. And so we have the green ash, we had the emerald, the emerald ash borer now, we had the elms before, and it just goes on. And here it is, the emerald ash borer, and this is what it's doing. It's feeding on the bark, it's cutting off the food supply and the phloem, and the trees are dying. And it's rapidly spreading. This is a risk map, but it's spread throughout a good chunk of Eastern North America. It's in Georgia. It hasn't made it to Florida, but we have ash, and it's potentially a threat to Florida, as you can see. This was in 1999, by the way. These are species that are cultivars of ash that were recommended as street trees in Michigan in 1999. Interesting. But the impact has been huge. Cities were having to deal with, thousands and thousands of dead trees. They're having to cut them down. You can imagine the impact to homeowners and property owners and neighborhoods and so on. So this is a before and after photo of the same street. And there's been big campaigns to try to deal with this. And it goes on and on and on. We have similar problems going on in Florida. We've had outbreaks of things like Diplodia on slash pine. This was in Orlando a few years ago along the interstate. We had a big outbreak of this blight on slash pines. There were a big monoculture of them, and this was actually induced mostly by over-fertilization. We've had laurel wilt, we've had lethal bronzing. So we have palms dying all over Gainesville right now due to lethal bronzing, not just Gainesville, but many other places. And it goes on and on. We've had a cultivar of live oak, right? It's been planted everywhere. Everyone knows about Cathedral, and this is a common cultivar. And it's been one of the most common cultivars. And at one point in the nursery trade, this made up something like 70%. This was several years ago, but this made up like about 70% of sales of live oaks in Florida. I think it's diversified now, but I think around maybe about 2012 or so, that was the case. And we were visiting nurseries around that time that were having major problems due to a combination of gall wasps and Diplodia cankers on them. And so this is Diplodia canker here, and again, the details, but Diplodia corticola, which causes the cankers, and these gall wasps, which were causing defoliation and tip dieback and things on the oaks. So anyway, just wanted to point that out. So, but it goes on, and our overuse of different species in Florida should not be not something that anyone is surprised by. We see drake elms overutilized. Drake elms are commonly used in the urban landscape around here a lot, but not just, certainly in Central Florida, and even to a certain extent, I see them as far south as, sometimes in South Florida. And, it's not it's not really a great species for most cases. They have a number of problems, one of which is we see cankers frequently on them now. Here's an example of cankers originating at pruning wounds on drake elms. Drake, by the way, is a cultivar of Ulmus parvifolia. So the species is lacebark elm, is what drake elm is. A drake elm is a cultivar of lacebark elm, Ulmus parvifolia. And so here we go again. We've selected a cultivar of a non-native species of elm, and not only that, but we're seeing a lot of seedlings of Ulmus parvifolia of lacebark elm in this area coming up all over the place. So it may have some invasive potential as well. That's something maybe we can talk about during the discussion. And of course, we've seen, some other species that are overutilized, things like queen palm. I don't think anybody here in this discussion would argue that queen palm is underutilized, but in addition to queen palm being susceptible to lethal bronzing, of course, it gets Ganoderma and other things as well. Here's one that's been affected by Ganoderma, but we can have a discussion about underutilized palms. I haven't really put a lot of that in this presentation, but that's something that could be discussed, and there might be some people in this group that could contribute to that discussion. But I would say that one thing that that is also something that would be worth discussing, and maybe part of another presentation, would be discussion about care of existing trees and putting more effort into retaining high value trees and high value underutilized tree species in particular. I think that's something that we don't do enough of really in our culture in general, is that we recognize that when we have a rare, individual or an old high value individual that we don't necessarily, we just treat it like anything else. We say, well, it's not really that important, and we don't necessarily need to do anything about it to care for it or whatever. Whereas you sometimes see in other locations, this is actually in China, but this is a Pinus tabuliformis, an old revered specimen, and the amount of care and effort put into protecting some of these old individuals in locations like this it's remarkable sometimes what you see in places like that. So I find that interesting. So let me continue. So let's talk about disease resistance, and we'll talk about some disease issues, and we'll talk about disease resistant individuals. And I want to talk about okay, yeah, let me skip over that stuff. So let's talk about some disease resistant individuals. So to begin with, I wanted to talk about so for one thing, we have some issues with I'm going to talk about some of the disease resistance stuff. Okay, so sometimes I see things like Leland cypress planted. So for one thing, let's just start off with that. So I think we need to stop planting Leland cypress, and it should never be planted again in the state of Florida. I cannot believe that I still see Leland cypress planted here. It's completely ill-adapted to Florida. Leland cypress is a hybrid between two Western species that are native. Actually, it's Alaskan yellow cypress is one of the species that's that's one of the parents. The other one is native to the Pacific Northwest. It is completely unadapted or ill-adapted to our conditions here. It actually commonly gets Ceridium canker and other needle cat or foliar pathogens as well in our conditions, our humid conditions. So in addition to just being poorly adapted, it's frequently affected by fungal pathogens. So we have native conifers here, native to our region, that are almost never planted. One of which is the Atlantic white cedar. Chamaecyparis thioides is native to Florida. It's native to two locations in Florida. On the peninsula, it's native to the Ocala National Forest, and also a small area in Putnam County. And it's also native to the Panhandle. You almost never see this planted. I mean, it's extremely rare to see this planted in landscapes. It's adapted to limestone-based soils. It's relatively slow growing. It's fully adapted to our heat, humidity, has no issues whatsoever. It's highly adapted to very wet, inundated conditions, but it can grow well on dry soils as well. I've seen it planted in totally normal sandy soils, and it grows fine. There are numerous horticultural selections that have been made from this particular species. The key here is provenance, because Chamaecyparis thioides, like red maple, grows all the way up along the East Coast to southern New England. And so the important thing about this species is we need to have selections made from our southern populations of it, or if nurseries are going to grow it, they need to collect seed from local populations of it. A few native nurseries have grown this over time. I was lucky enough to get a few from a Florida population and grow them in my own landscape, and they've performed very well. Never had a problem. Never have seen any pathogen issues with it. It's just, again, for a conifer, an evergreen conifer one, if you want something, an alternative to Leland cypress, this would be an excellent alternative. Here's what some old, very, very old specimens look like in the Ocala National Forest. But these are old specimens. These are, who knows how old these are. These may be over 100 years old or something. They're very slow growing. They don't achieve this type of stature in a probably even a human's lifetime, I don't think. Eastern red cedar or southern red cedar, this is not underutilized, I wouldn't say, but there are a number of cultivars, and there's even a lot of newer cultivars that are probably better that we could talk about beyond Brody. Brody is in cultivation. It's not like this is a rare or underutilized, but I just want to point out that, again, if you want to grow some different cultivars or plant conifers, if you're interested in conifers, and if you would like even a narrow cultivar to replace something like the Italian cypress, or you want something as an alternative to podocarpus, I would suggest some of the cultivars of Juniper silicicola or southern red cedar. Go with Juniper silicicola, by the way, because, again, eastern red cedar, Juniper virginiana, if you don't want to separate it out from southern red cedar, it has a wide distribution. So if you get selections from some of the northern forms, they may not be well adapted, but there have been a number of nurserymen making selections from some of the southern forms. There are a number of new cultivars out there. Brody is a more narrow, upright, compact one, but even just seedlings of southern red cedar, these are well adapted, and these will grow well all the way down into South Florida. I've seen them, planted in their native as far south as about Sarasota. And so they could be grown well and should be grown more. And again, nobody should be growing Leland cypress under any circumstance in Florida for any reason. But just wanted to point that out. So some other tough, smaller species we could be growing more, Quercus myrtifolia. There's so many oaks we could talk about. I could spend an entire hour just talking about all the oaks, but this is one that I've grown personally. I've seen it being grown by some nurseries. The city of Gainesville, believe it or not, grew Quercus myrtifolia as a street tree. And there are a few small ones in a couple of locations. So we can discuss those, but Quercus myrtifolia. So this is one of our native oaks. It grows naturally on dry, sandy soils. It grows in coastal areas. This is very salt tolerant as well, interestingly. But it is a red oak, but it's one of our smaller growing ones. At maturity, they only make it to about 20, 25 feet or so typically. They're very shrubby. But they can be grown as a standard. They can be trained up, they can be grown, as a single stem if you trim them. That's what the city of Gainesville did. They grew them under or in a situation, I think, where there were some power lines. But there's so many native oaks that aren't grown. And this is one of them. Chapman's oak is another one that makes a nice small tree and, small shrub / tree in the landscape. The only drawback to the species is it might sucker in, some situations. So you would want to use it in a landscape where that would be okay. Now, I wouldn't try to fight that. I'd just use it in a landscape where that is where that's going to be acceptable. But it's got, such interesting foliage, and it's just, why plant a live oak in a situation where it's not going to have room? I see that happening all the time. People put live oaks where there's never going to be room for a live oak, where we could be planting these smaller species. And there's a lot of them. This is just an example, but we could be doing, Quercus geminata, sand live oak. We could be doing Quercus myrtifolia. We could be doing Chapman's oak. We could be doing sand post oak. Lots of them that would be much better in the situation. All right, let me keep going here. So there's a close up of the new foliage on a myrtle oak, which is always attractive and tough as nails. Very, very easy. I have several of these in my home landscape, and always appreciate the way they look. Okay, so the next group of, and I'm starting with small species, by the way, here. The next group of really tough, very disease resistant, easy to grow are Sideroxylon. So these used to be known as Bumelia. Sideroxylon is the genus. There's a number of different species. You almost never see these planted, but when you see them in the wild, you're like, what are those? Those are cool. Those are really pretty. And these are native to South Florida people. These are native all the way down to South Florida. There are species of Sideroxylon. There are, I'm trying to remember how many species there are native to Florida. There's several. And there's some that are very local. There's one that's called Sideroxylon alachuense, like native to Alachua County, or native or named after Alachua County. And so these are, they're called the bullies, or tough bullies. They're the common name of them, which is kind of interesting. Very, very, very tough trees. So they're evergreen. They have these, some of them have like small little thorns, not frequent, but they're very, very drought resistant. And they have a lot of them have either sort of a glaucous or whitish underside. Some have sort of a reddish pubescence as well on the underside, depending on the species. Very glossy, simple leaves like you see there. And most of them stay under about 25 to 30 feet tall at maturity. And they usually grow in sort of secondary xeric kind of habitats or dryish landscapes, but they seem to be very tolerant of a lot of different conditions. Some of the native plant nurseries grow them, but you just don't see them being planted much or utilized in landscapes. But I think there's a potential to use these a lot more. Just putting them out there is one to like consider here. And I think they're very attractive, and they do have the flower isn't super showy, but when they're, but it does have a cool a little spiky looking yellowish flower, which is interesting when they're present. Let's see. Okay, a couple of others. This species is probably a little more for central and North Florida, but I mean, I think it could be tried further south, especially the population, if you got seed from the Florida populations. But this is a speckled alder, Ulmus seriolata. These are native to central and North Florida, basically, but our native alder. This is the nitrogen fixer found in along streams and wetlands, but they're adapted to drier conditions. There's some planted on campus right over here by McCarty. There's some that were planted, interestingly, just in a normal landscape, and they've done really well. They've sort of grown as a multi-stem shrub, and they kind of surprised me how well they performed in that landscape. They have these interesting catkins in late winter, early spring, and they stays a small shrub, very high wildlife value as well, and extremely adaptable. And again, it's a nitrogen fixer, so this can grow in really poor soils, and fix atmospheric nitrogen, so it can actually improve the soils as a result. And I actually grew one from seed and planted it in my landscape, and it's done really well. It hasn't had any troubles. It's not growing in a wetland at all, even though that's where they grow naturally, you know. And so I'm thinking that this actually has a lot more potential to be used in, you know, in landscapes here. I think people just need to start trying it more. This is what it looks like in the wild here. When those catkins, they come out red in the spring, and then they elongate and turn yellow. And so I think they're very attractive when they first flower. Something that you wouldn't, you know, maybe initially think that, you know, that alder would have these really pretty flowers, but they really do. And they're in the winter, late winter, whenever it flowers like that. So as a larger, so I'm going to talk about some larger trees. So I put liriodendron in here, not because it's really, I wouldn't say it's necessarily underutilized. It might be in certain areas. We see it being planted more around Gainesville, but not a lot elsewhere. And it actually is native all the way down to right near Orlando, are the southernmost populations of tulip poplar or tulip tree. And interestingly, what I find interesting, a couple of things about it. One is that in the Florida populations of it are particularly well adapted to heat and to wet soils and interestingly hurricanes. So I'm showing you a picture of this tree because this tree is one of the few standing trees that are right near where Hurricane Michael hit near Torrey State Park, where all the other trees around it got knocked down, and there was this big massive tulip tree, and there were actually quite a few of these large ones still standing. I mean, a lot of the branches got ripped off of it, but this massive 100-foot tall, you know, tulip tree is still standing after this area saw 140 to 150 mile per hour wind gusts. This is right in the, you know, center of where Hurricane Michael, you know, came right roaring up the, you know, right up the the Apalachicola River at Torrey State Park. And so it was pretty fascinating to see so many of these tulip trees, these liriodendrons, still standing. So they're remarkably tough. And so again, this is where provenance is crucial, because this species has a wide range in Eastern North America. So if you find, you know, nurseries selling liriodendron, that doesn't mean they're going to be adapted to Florida. You have to have the Florida ecotype to grow them well in Florida. But if you have the Florida ecotype, they can grow really, really well. Very fast growing. They become a large tree. They have a beautiful flower, really interesting leaf, and they can be a great large tree. And there are even some cultivars that have been made that stay smaller from at least the Gulf Coast population. This one's called Little Volunteer. This was a smaller statured individual. There's one of these planted over off of 23rd Terrace here in town, in Ed Gilman's old plots. And so this is what it looks like. It stays it's about a third of the normal size of the tree, which is pretty interesting. So speaking of smaller statured individuals of some of our larger trees, I mean, I'm a big Taxodium fan, but Taxodium isn't, I wouldn't say underutilized. But I would say that Taxodium cultivars are underutilized. In other words, what I was saying earlier about cultivars, by the way, I'm not against using cultivars. What I'm against is overutilizing cultivars. In other words, I think we need to be, you know, utilize cultivars sparingly, you know. So there are some cultivars though that I would say we could use more in or at least trial them more in our landscapes. So there are some cultivars like of Taxodium that I think we should be trying more, because they could be used in specific situations where they would make more sense. So instead of planting a Taxodium that gets huge in a landscape where there is no space for it, we could use like some of these dwarf cultivars, for example. Like there's this one called PV Minaret of Taxodium disticum that stays small. It's a natural dwarf, and it's a magnificent little tree, and it's beautiful, and it can stay small. There's several wonderful cultivars of Taxodium. There's a weeping cultivar called Cascade Falls There's actually two cultivars, another one called Falling Water, which are beautiful weeping individuals of Taxodium. And there's other dwarf ones as well. So those would be worthwhile exploring, especially in urban landscapes where there's just not space for the, for the full species, right? Like we can't have these 1,000-year-old individuals like Lady Liberty, or, like the Senator used to be. This is Lady Liberty next to the Senator. My kids sitting in front of it. So some other underutilized species that I think we could be using more, things like Carpinus caroliniana, hornbeam, eastern hornbeam, or ironwood. This grows all the way down to Central Florida, but I've seen it's very, very adaptable. It's very heat tolerant, very tolerant of different soil types. These I've been thinking lately that Carpinus caroliniana and its sister species, Australia, the hop hornbeam, are very tough and could be planted more than they are. If you aren't familiar with these species, they grow in understory conditions in the wild, but they seem to be very adapted and they seem to grow well when planted out in more sun. And they are both very tough. The Carpinus caroliniana has the so-called ironwood or muscle wood. The trunk of it looks like muscle, and this species is native all the way down into Central America. Interestingly, it has populations all the way down into Guatemala. So it is very well adapted, depending on the seed source. And so I think it could grow in South Florida if you had the right, seed. And that's a very important point. So don't underestimate what I said about provenance. Another native tree species from our hardwood forests, which, and maybe I should have just put Caria genus here instead of just Caria tomentosa. I particularly think Caria tomentosa, the mockernut hickory, is underutilized as a tree species in the landscape. I think part of the reason is in nurseries, it's a little bit tricky to grow as a nursery species, tree, because it develops a taproot pretty early on. But I think nurseries are starting to understand the technology needed to grow it as a nursery crop. But I've seen a few, grown and planted in the landscape, even here on campus, and they performed very, very well. This also grows pretty far south on the peninsula. And then there are other closely related Carias that grow all the way down into Central and South Central Florida. And some of those species would be well adapted to certain conditions in South Florida. And you almost never see Carias planted, certainly in landscapes in South Florida, almost never. And I think those are, that's a shame, because some of these have high wildlife value. They would add diversity. And Caria tomentosa is, produce some of the best fall color we get in our area. We don't get a lot of fall color, and I think it's something that we should be striving for. And this is a species. This is a specimen on my own property right here, and it produces glorious fall color for me every year. And so I think it's worth considering. Again, you have to have it in the right location. I mean, not everywhere you want big hickory nuts falling, right? But in parks and certain landscapes, this is great, and it's really important for the wildlife, and it's an important part of our diversity. And I think it's one that we'd want to consider. Very drought tolerant, extremely drought tolerant, extremely wind tolerant. Very, very tough. You don't have, this is a species, you plant it, leave it. You don't have to, there's very little you'd have to do with this, except again, it just needs space, that kind of thing. Another one that's extremely tough, very important for wildlife, has a lot more adaptability than I think people can maybe would consider, is white oak, Quercus alba. Again, we could talk about oaks. We could have a whole presentation just on oaks alone, but Quercus alba is surprising because it's thought of as more northern species, but it does make it into Florida naturally. Just to our north is its southernmost populations, but it's been planted here in Gainesville. We have some planted ones. In fact, we have some downtown planted Quercus alba, not bluff oak, but actually white oak. And they've done remarkably well. They're beautiful, healthy individuals, you know, in the hottest part of summer, they're still dark green, lush. And I think they could be planted a lot more than they are. Also, these are some of this is one of the species that when a lot of the other trees were knocked down by Hurricane Michael, they're standing there looking flawless. You see on the picture on the right, that tree right there in the far right there that's standing there, that's Quercus alba. Very, very, very tough, you know, tree. And so it has these, you know, very beautiful lobed leaves. Again, wide distribution, but provenance is critical for this. Another native hardwood that could be used a lot more, and I'm very partial to this one, is our native basswood. The Florida basswood, or, you know, depends on your taxonomy or you know, what botanist you're referring to. Some people lump this all together with eastern basswood. Some people want to separate it out. This is another one that, you know, depending on the botanists, you know, the eastern basswood goes all the way down into Mexico. Some people separate these out as different subspecies, but however you want to look at it, we have a basswood here in Florida. Okay. And it is, you know, very tough, very well adapted. It produces, you know, these beautiful sort of heart-shaped leaves. It produces a very aromatic flower that smells wonderful. It's very important for honey production, and so pollinators are very highly attracted to it. It makes a really nice shade tree. And so, you know, lindens, okay, which are Tilias, are really high value, high quality shade trees in a lot of temperate regions. Well, this is another linden, right? And it's almost never planted. It's native, you know, it's found in our woods. It seems like it grows sort of on a pretty wide range of soil types. It prefers a little bit richer organic soils, but you see it sometimes on a wide range of soils. And when I've seen it planted, it's done great, but nurseries almost never grow it. And it's a head scratcher to me. Like, why not? Because this is a great, well-adapted tree for us. And so it's really surprising that it's not planted more. It could be. And so anyway, Florida basswood. Another one that's been around for a long time, but it's surprising that it's sort of like, it seems like it's fallen out of the landscape trade, but should be, I think, in the landscape trade again. This is a non-native, but the Nagia nagi, the Podocarpus nagi, it used to be Podocarpus, now it's Nagia nagi, is this Japanese Nagia, which is it's a conifer. It's an evergreen Podocarpus relative. It produces these broad evergreen leaves. It produces a cone that's like, it's almost like a fleshy cone, almost looks like almost like a little plum type fruit, but it's a cone. And they are very, very tough. These are one of the most wind resistant trees you could possibly get. That's why I'm talking about them. And sometimes you'll see old individuals occasionally. The one on the left is planted in front of the infirmary on campus. The other one on the right is one I have in my landscape. They make a beautiful tree slowly. They're not fast growing, but they're extremely adapted, and they seem like they're really underutilized. I think they should be planted more. We plant the regular Podocarpus macrophyllus way too much, I feel like, and this one is way underplanted. And this is well adapted. It seems like it'll grow pretty much anywhere. The only thing I sometimes see with it is a little bit of, I think it's magnesium deficiency on some of the leaves. But on most soils, this is very tough. It produces, this is what the foliage looks like. It's kind of a broad, thick, leathery leaf, and very, very attractive. A few other quick things here. A few more cultivars of some of our native trees. There's a lot of cultivars out there that interestingly, for whatever reason, Florida doesn't seem to utilize cultivars of native species as much as a lot of other parts of the country. Never understood that. If you go north, you'll see a lot of cultivars utilized that here we almost never see. For example, our native sweet gum, there are numerous cultivars, dwarf cultivars. This is a very narrow cultivar of our native sweet gum called Slender Silhouette, and it makes this very narrow fastigiate, crown. It's a very, very good one. This actually grows really well here. We have some at Citra that are doing really, really well. There's a few in the landscape, but they're, I mean, almost never seen in the nursery trade here. And I think they would do, I know they do very well here, but this is actually underutilized here. I think in some places it's starting to become a little bit too much used, but in our area in Florida, you almost never see it. And it produces a nice fall color. Same thing with the Liriodendron I mentioned earlier. There's a narrow cultivar of it called Arnold. There are some cultivars of sycamore, platanus, which some of which are very resistant to disease, to anthracnose and powdery mildew. There's one called Silverwood, which is we have it at Citra. It's been doing very well. It has this very nice silvery, very white bark, which seems to do very well. And I'll just leave you with some stunning pictures of our state champion Quercus virginiana out at Ceylon, the Ceylon oak, I should say, out at La Crosse. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you for your time. And this is, again, this is a huge topic. We could talk all day. I mean, there's so many. I tried to, balance it between things that, you could actually maybe find in the nursery trade, some things that are, maybe have some adaptability statewide. Again, like I said, this is a little bit difficult because things that might grow in one location, you might not be able to grow somewhere else. And we could talk about really, really oddball things, but, you may not be able to find, it's going to be hard for most people to find sources for some of that stuff. But I'll stop with that, and I'm happy to answer any questions or we can entertain discussion. I think I'm out of time. Thank you very much.
Jason, thank you so very much. That's so much information, a lot of good points that were in your presentation as well. A couple of questions that came across. Can you think of a fast growing tree that might be suitable for pasture lands in South Florida?
Fast growing for pasture and
kind of long-lived, fast-growing trees.
Long-lived in South Florida. Well, I mean, it depends on the soil. I mean, it really depends a lot on the soil type, and that's really important. So if you're in South Florida, you got to consider, and pastures are particularly difficult, right? Because you got to consider the compaction and how much potential damage you might get from, the livestock. I would definitely consider, it depends on how much moisture you're getting and things like that down there. Yeah, I don't know. I would definitely consider, let me think for a minute. You're kind of putting putting me on the spot here thinking about that.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I would probably consider pines, quite honestly. Consider slash pines. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know that you can come up with anything much better than that. What I would probably try to do is maybe consider, if you can, maybe do a situation where you have a little area that's fenced off to get them established first, and, because you're going to have to do that probably with anything, get them established. And because it won't take too long before they're large enough and, but.
I think they're underutilized in many areas.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of something that's going to be well adapted to those conditions, I mean, you're not going to get anything that's too much faster than that. I mean, and it's going to be tough. But
any advice for finding some of the, the trees that you've mentioned that may be hard to find in the trades? How can people, do you have any tips for finding some of the unusual stuff, especially those with the provenance, to Florida?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, one of the best places to get plants, get unusual plants are if you can go to, so most botanical gardens and arboreta have annual plant sales or semi-annual plant sales. Like they'll have like, fall plant sale or spring plant sales. Those can be excellent places to get plants. And usually they, will have either some of these unusual species, or when they sell, things they're going to have stuff that's going to be good. You know what I'm saying? So that's a good start. And I recommend if you have the ability, try to go to those because you're going to find good stuff. The native plant nurseries in Florida are great. We have some of the best native plant nurseries anywhere. And some of those native plant nurseries are, they're the places that they tend to source their seeds carefully. They tend to think of those things. Provenance is, a top priority. And so they have the ability to source their material carefully and everything. So that's another consideration. And then I guess on top of that, if you're really serious about it, and I mean, you're really into it, consider starting, trying to propagate something, learn how to propagate your own plants some, I'm serious about that. Like it's not the most difficult thing in the world, and you might enjoy it. I mean, I'm a big believer in trying to learn how to propagate plants and learn how to do it. I mean, you could work, that's a whole, man, I know that's a whole nother concept, but yeah, you could, if there's something you're really serious about over time, you could learn that component as well. But I would say the first thing is to, seek out those native plant nurseries. Ask, if there's something that that they don't have, you can ask them about it. They might know, they might know somebody else. They might know where you can get it, or they might be able to do it for you. And then again, there's, native or botanical gardens and arboreta, they often have these plant sales where you find so many good things at those plant sales. Those have been my two, best sources for things for the most part. And then again, really unusual things like I've tried to because it's something, plant geeks, they're really into things. We tend to, share seeds or cuttings, and we learn how to propagate things on our own a little bit. And it can be very rewarding and fun to learn how to do that stuff,
Fantastic. I agree. At some of these festivals and sales, you never know what you're going to find. You find some really unusual things. And you mentioned, Florida Association of Native Nurseries. That's, we've got a great resource there to find some of these plants that, may not be found, in some of the bigger, retail garden centers and things you might find at some of these other nurseries.
That's right. And there's so many good, we have some of the best native plant nurseries anywhere in the country, in Florida. Like we have some really good. And I don't want to recommend anybody specific, because again, depending on what part of the state you're in, there's just different, but really every part of the state has really good ones. I've been to a number of them over the years, met some of these people, and yeah, exactly. The Florida Association of Native Plant Nurseries is really good. And if you want to join the Florida Native Plant Society, through that network as well, through the different chapters, you get to know people as well, and they might know who's growing different things. You're able to get stuff that way. Of course, you don't want to collect anything in the wild or anything like that. That's, you can't do that. You have to make sure you're getting things through growers who've done it, legally. There's, and there are channels to do that. They get permits to collect the seeds, correctly and things like that. And make sure you're doing it the right way, because we have a big problem with that with certain stuff. There has been an issue historically with people poaching stuff, and that's been a problem. Trees not so much as it is with like orchids and other stuff, but that's still, we want to promote ethical, seed collection, cutting collection, stuff like that, and working with nurseries that have sort of the right channels to do that. But there is a really good, I think we have a good system, I think, in Florida overall for like commercial production of some of these rare, it's really through cultivation, I think, that a lot of these plants are, you know, in some ways they're being maintained. I mean, and I think that's why I mean, especially some of the really rare stuff, promoting it, you know, getting them in cultivation, I think has been a good thing for a lot of stuff. I didn't really talk about anything that was like super like rare endemics or anything, but that's a whole nother thing. But anyway.
Again, those resources, those people connections that you can make through native plant societies and other organizations, I think are, you know, those connections will lead you to some of these plants that are maybe difficult to come by.
Yeah, exactly. I see somebody posted a link to FANN on there and everything, which is great. And again, yeah, that we have some excellent resources there. The Florida Native Plant Society is excellent. We have and I really also would suggest, I mean, some of the best places for seeing these things is going to some of the botanical gardens and stuff in Florida. We have so many good, just wonderful botanical gardens and collections. You go there and you see these plants, you know, in, you know, the in cultivation, right? And I mean, that for me, that's been the big inspiration. I've seen this stuff planted and I see it performing well, right? And then and you're like, okay, wow, I see that doing well there, and it makes me think, okay, why? Okay, maybe I can grow that, or why isn't that, you know, why isn't that planted more? You know, those are the kinds of, you know, that's kind of the starting point for me mostly is, you know, so I anytime I'm really anywhere in the state, I try to go visit whatever little botanical garden or, you know, public garden there is. So this public gardens are really a key resource, I think. We have so many of them, and a lot of the extension offices too, you know, they'll have some kind of, you know, there's some kind of planting, some kind of public garden or little something, you know, where there's stuff planted, and they're useful, very, very useful for like reference, right? And so for me, that's a good starting point.
Fantastic. One of the questions that came through, they say, you know, do you have a list of the books that that you've authored and taken part in?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done a lot of books. I mean, I have a couple, but most of mine are related to more disease issues and stuff. I haven't done on this topic. I haven't done a whole lot, honestly. I'd like to do more, but I have a couple, and I can send them to you, or I can put them on there. Honestly, not a lot. I'm working on one right now. We're working on a new disease, a new ID guide or a field guide to disease, you know, to tree diseases basically in Florida, and hoping to have that finished by the fall. And we did one on the fungal, basically the decay fungi of Florida, an ID guide to the decay fungi on trees. And so I'd be happy to share those. Thank you. I see somebody's seen that. Yeah. So basically, this topic, like I said, has been more of a side talk. I don't want to say a side issue, but it goes hand in hand with, you know, working on disease resistance and things like that. And you know, I guess when you have a lot of interests, you can kind of tie them together. But I was fortunate in this position to be able to do these things, and I was really lucky to kind of be able to pursue them simultaneously. But I'll be honest with you, you know, there's some really good people here that are continuing to do this work. And this is one thing I wanted to make sure I said. So even though I gave this talk, there are multiple people at UF here who are very interested in diversifying the urban landscape and are currently doing some really good work on this. So Ryan Klein, who's in environmental horticulture, is really interested in this topic and is pursuing this. You know, he's one person. We have Andrew. So let me think of all the different people we have. So Ryan Klein is one. We have, of course, you're interested in this topic as well, right? So, and you're going to continue working on this as well. Trying to think who else is working on this. I mean, there's several people in the Florida chapter ISA that have been working on this for a number of years. And then it's been an ongoing issue. Michael Andrew as well has been working on this here. He's one of my colleagues. And he's got a, kind of a big project that's been ongoing with sort of more urban forestry side of things. But he's definitely interested in this. Andrew Kozer is also interested in this topic and has been addressing it. And in the city of Gainesville, like I've been working with for a number of years. I was on the tree advisory board for the city. There's several really good people there who have been sort of interested in this topic for a while as well, and have been working on it. We all at one point had it was a working group, and it involved a number of people. And Rob Northrop, a lot of you might know who Rob Northrop is. He was involved with that and helped sort of organize that working group. And we were trying to sort of coordinate, I guess you could say, kind of a broader effort to get basically nurseries involved in trying to see how we could sort of get nurseries to diversify what they're growing, to kind of connect the nurseries with the landscape architects, with the sort of the consumers, kind of getting the whole kind of cycle going to diversify things. And then on top of that, we also have an urban forestry council extension group that's focused on that. This is part of what they're addressing, and that's being organized by Marguerite Beckford, and she is coordinating that as well. And that's a big effort. There's a big bigger component addressing sort of urban forestry needs, but diversification of the landscape is part of that as well. So there's a lot of different people interested in this. Just wanted to point that out. So, my interest in trees and diversity, is just sort of a little tiny piece of it. And I just like trees. I like I just like talking about them. So but there's people that are doing some serious stuff with this. And I think you're in good hands, and there's a lot of really great people in UF-IFAS that are going to continue working on this. And yeah, I'm going to Ohio, back where I'm originally from. And but I'll be a champion for this, and I'll do what I can to help support people, but you're going to be in really good hands continuing on here. So
very cool, Jason. Thank you so much. A lot of people have expressed that they love the topic, they love the presentation. They're sorry to see you go, but as you said, there's a lot of people carrying on. We really appreciate your presentation today, and good luck in the future. I would like to point out to folks that, we do have some upcoming webinars. As you heard Claire say, we have a GSI webinar on bioswales coming up on July 27th at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And also on October 8th, next month, we have our normally scheduled professional webinar that's on ornamental grasses with Aaron Alvarez, 10 o'clock Eastern time. Please make sure you fill out the evaluations. As Claire said, it really helps us plan for the next year. Jason, thank you. Good luck in the future. Good luck with the move. I look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you. Take care now.
Take care.